Hello, and welcome back to the Flywheel Economist podcast. In part one of the Sialkot episode, we took a look at the trade context of Pakistan, the amazing business community of Sialkot, and finally, how the Sialkot International Airport project took off. Today, join us again and our incredible guest, Adnan Ghuman, who is a World Bank economist, Sohail Nasir Ghuman, the Director of Marketing at Leatherfield, a company based in Sialkot, Pakistan, and Salamat Ali, who's an economic advisor for international trade policy at the Commonwealth Secretariat, as we dive into the challenges, why it succeeded, and the biggest lessons learned.
All right, Northern England, 1700s, booming industries, textile, coal, iron, transporting raw materials on existing roads was inefficient and expensive. James Brindley, who was an engineer, and the Duke of Bridgewater, who was the financier and who owned coal mines, basically funded the production of a canal to transport his coal from the mines in Worsley to the growing industrial hub of Manchester. As a result, the price of coal in Manchester was cut in half, fueling the Industrial Revolution and arguably climate change. We have a canal building frenzy in Northern England, which helps to make trade easier, cuts costs, more efficiency. You get things like the canal connecting Leeds to Liverpool so that woolen mills in Leeds can export through the port at Liverpool. You get other canals across different parts of the country, connecting the potteries in Stoke, right the way across to places like Hull. There's a culture of collaboration and collective investment that stems out of this as wealthy industrialists and landowners pool their resources to fund the canal construction. Let's go to a different time period, a different place. We're back in Sialkot, and you see 200 plus directors of businesses in the Sialkot community investing in this airport, becoming shareholders in this airport project. Jaffer, is this the same thing playing out in different times and different places?
I think it is. Look, there's obvious differences, right? There's a difference in the operating environment. I'm not saying that. Well, I could be saying that Pakistan might be a little harder to do businesses than the UK at that time. But the basic essence of a group of businesses looking beyond their individual interests to agree, and then also have the backbone to see it through, right? So I think the spirit of cooperation, the vision for a future, and addressing something that brings efficiency to everyone and implementing it. Those are all common themes between the two examples that you've given.
So if this is a good model, why don't we see it catching on elsewhere? Why is it so limited in the number of examples we can bring? Why do I have to trawl all the way back to the 1700s in Northern England to give a similar type example? Why is it so rare?
So I was thinking about this. I was thinking, so when we started this, one of the questions I was thinking about is how, not why, but how do you replicate this? And honestly, I would struggle, right? So if we use Sialkot as an example, and if the assignment is replicate this somewhere else, there are multiple factors that we sort of know the bucket that they fall under, the sort of softer collaboration, cooperative, the DNA, whatever you want to call it, that are hard to replicate. I think most businesses, actually, it's funny, Salamat was in his interview, he speaks about how, I know it was Adnan maybe, about how near the end of the approval process, there was a push to move this airport from Sialkot to Gujarat, which is part of the sort of the industrial triangle, the golden belt, whatever you want to call it. but that's the sort of behavior I would expect from Pakistani businesses, which is see someone else succeeding and you try to shoot them in the foot or take away their ice cream. But the level of cooperation, I think the number of factors needed is what makes it difficult. I think the the businesses tend to look at their own interests first rather than um, collective interests. It also requires sort of a geographical density of similar businesses in a similar location, which tends to exist in most places, but sometimes it's not so. Um, so multiple layers of things, and then I think in replication, at least in Pakistan, there is a tendency for replication to be led by government or some sort of policy incentive to make this happen. Whereas I think one of the key factors in Sialkot's success was the much more diminished role of government. So I think if you were to try to replicate this through policy or incentives in Pakistan, you would struggle because one of the reasons Sialkot succeeded was uh, this was a Sialkot project where government assisted rather than a government project where Sialkot assisted. And the latter, I would assume, fails 99 times out of 100.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there, Jaffer, in the sense that the lesson learning which seems to be coming out on this, I don't think government is necessarily the target audience for this. I think it's other chambers of commerce. It's other, find other backwaters across the world where businesses feel like they're not prioritized by government and say, look, this is how a chamber of commerce can potentially operate if businesses club together, if they can start doing these investments in important, critical business environment projects in their area, you can make a difference. What have we got next, Favor? What's the next section?
Our next section, we're going to be taking a look at the challenges.
Definitely. You see the aviation industries. You know that there was it was done in 2010, and before that, September 11th has changed whole world, and there was security reasons and a lot of concerns about that. But gradually, one by one, it was like they were the people of Sialkot. They were having ample time to go through each and everything. It took like maybe 3 years more than they anticipated. But whatever was the queries there, they troubleshooted one by one. I will say this: you see that it is ownership is private. Right? They brought in the human resource from the civil aviation. Uh, this is airport security force, and so they indebted them and they made it at par with like Islamabad and Lahore professionally. So then they got the approvals finally from the government.
This is a very important question. I think while we think about private sector doing its thing to bring a city together and develop infrastructure, I think government presence is felt everywhere in Pakistan. You can't move without government support anywhere, and especially the political capital in larger cities of Pakistan is very strong. And on top, you need to understand that civil aviation doesn't like sharing space with any private entities. Civil aviation, which is the authority that regulates the aviation industry in Pakistan and airports, it wasn't very forthcoming on this issue. And the fact that it complicated more was that there were other players in the market as well. So, for example, there's this neighboring district to Sialkot, Gujarat, which had politicians which had very close collaboration with President Musharraf. So they were also in the contention of getting the regulatory approval to get this airport. So there were multi-tier kind of like issues. But I think businessmen stood their ground. They were able to pitch in capital. They were also able to use their political capital very smartly. And what really helped, I think, this idea was that Sialkot is in a region, and if you look around this region, it's very close to Kashmir, it's very close to these districts or kind of like areas where there is a huge expat community. So they've all, it's not only that the industry is benefiting from this airport, it's all those expats who live in Europe, live in US, or the labor that is working in GCC from these districts is being helped by the airport in terms of like landing or departing from very close to their home. It was not that this airport got constructed and there weren't challenges. There were huge challenges. There were challenges in terms of um, building a minimum infrastructure. There were challenges in terms of keeping it operational through very difficult times, or times like COVID. So I think it's a mindset. It's a mindset that you come to you face a problem, you find a solution, not through conflict, but through proposing solution by provision of capital, by provision of ideas, because it's not just one thing which Richard gets very kind of like diluted in all this conversation is the management practice. Generally, organizations in emerging economies or entities in emerging economies, and Pakistan is no exception, suffer from poor management practices. And I think this is where Sialkot is an exception because it's a private sector led initiative. The first instinct is to cut cost. It's not to expand cost. So if you look at the HR expenses, I'm pretty sure there would be much, and the HR number as well, it will be much lower compared to any of other airports. I'm not making the comparison in terms of like flights, of course, Lahore and Islamabad would have more traffic. But if you look at kind of like a normalized comparison, the HR cost per passenger in Sialkot would be much lower. And I think that's the psyche. Create value by achieving efficiency. And that has to do with management practices. And I think this is where maybe others can learn from Sialkot. I was trying to refresh my memory as well that how, because as a child, I kept hearing about the airport for a very long time, that there will be an airport in Sialkot, but it only materialized when I was well into my 20s. So of course, a lot of time passed. But that time didn't pass because there was lack of effort or there was lack of capital put on the table. I think it was all because that the government approval process is very tenuous. And civil aviation, the regulator was not willing to share this space with private sector. So as a first venture in Pakistan, of course, there were a lot of challenges. And the approvals only came through during President Musharraf's time. So, and that's because he had of the many rulers of Pakistan in recent times, he had a very kind of like progressive view about exporting sector in Pakistan. At some point in time, there was real rumors in media that the airport would go from Sialkot to Gujarat, because Gujarat had politicians who were working as deputy prime minister or as high as prime minister under President Musharraf. So there were real concerns, but I think businessmen were able to overcome these challenges through their persuasion, but mostly through persuasion through putting capital on the table. That they came together, formed a coalition, put up a so there were some 200 plus directors of the airport initially, and all of these directors were shareholders, and all of these shareholders, if I'm not mistaken, pitched back in the day PKR 5 million on the table to buy their share. So that brought together a huge sum of money, which then government had to co-opt, because it wasn't like something that they were just asking for a project like usually people do in Pakistan, that give us a project through the development spending of the budget. This was private sector saying that we have this pool of money, you give us approvals. If you can pitch in, but at least give us approvals. So to their luck, government agreed. Government gave the regulatory clearances, and then there was some capital put in as well. But that was not the end of the challenge. Once the airport came into existence, the operation started. The infrastructure was still not complete. So for a long time, they put levies on passengers traveling, and passengers would complain as well that we are traveling from our own local airport and we are being punished. But I think they were able to go through that phase and collect enough money, and they also generated surpluses from the airport as well, which is not common in Pakistan. Revenues, they were plowed back in as well. And then to survive COVID was quite remarkable. I think this was a great achievement on part of a very young airport. They were able to sustain it, which shows that there's resilience. And this resilience comes from the fact that people, the management are professional businessmen. They run their own businesses on profit and loss basis. So they look at this operation as a profit and loss operation as well, because they have their own stakes in it, not just in terms of capital, but in terms of having access to international market through their buyers coming in, through their traveling abroad, their goods and services traveling abroad as well.
Okay, there were a few challenges that were mentioned. Some spoke about sort of minimal supporting infrastructure, the difficulties during the COVID times, the slow approval process in getting the airport built, levies they had to place on passengers once the airport was built in order to claw back finances for further development. I mean, Jaffer, how do these challenges stack up for you? How different are they to what other big projects would face in Pakistan?
They're not, right? So I think the first thing is, would you get a project this big run by the private sector in Pakistan? To me, the answer is very clearly no. Anything to do with an airport or any large sort of shared infrastructure, the first reaction is always, oh, this is going to be a government thing. Globally, I know constructing airports isn't a new field, right? I mean, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. People have done it for countless years in countless locations. But I think doing it here, having it private sector led, and that too with a sort of a collection of SMEs, I find mind-boggling. I think, to put it in context, the government of Pakistan was doing its own airport in Islamabad, that Richard, you've benefited from many times. It was delayed by more than a decade. It was supposed to have 2 parallel runways, and they ended up putting the runways so close together that planes couldn't actually fly or take off at the same time. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge that the rest of the world seems to have overcome. But I think the extent of the feat in Pakistan for a collection of private firms to get this done, both in terms of design challenges, more so in terms of approval challenges, and then also to run it successfully, right? Although I think there's a lesson in there that I'll delve into in following parts. But I think it's just, I cannot think of this happening again. It might have been difficult. It might have been very challenging. It might have been delayed, as Adnan said, but I think it's a minor miracle that it occurred in a place like Pakistan.
Well, look, Adnan speaks about this being a project when he was a kid growing up. Everyone was speaking about the Sialkot airport, and it seemed to take years before it went ahead. And he mentions about President Musharraf and him being a bit more receptive to exports as part of the growth story. Was this, to what extent was this luck? Did Sialkot just hit it lucky that there was a president who saw the benefits of exports that was in place, or would this, do you think, was this more design? Would this have happened irrespective? Would it just, what is it, luck or design, Jaffer?
No, I don't think I would call it luck. I think if you ask the people of Sialkot, they would say luck as a part of it, but I think it's the vision, the cooperation, and also the resilience, right? They knew that they just need to keep plugging away. And fine, Musharraf came in, but that doesn't mean that someone equally pro-exports wouldn't have come in much later. And I'm pretty sure if Musharraf had failed, then Sialkot would have kept plugging away and waited for their moment. So I owe it to, I laid down a vision and resilience, and sort of sticking with the plan, regardless of the headwinds no pun intended, that you face in constructing an airport.
Favour, thinking back to, again, our other case study on the Yaba tech cluster, there was a pivotal point where government had to had to waive some right-of-way levies for the laying of the fibre optic cable. How similar do you see this story in terms of the role of government?
Yeah, I think it's quite similar actually, because I remember, I believe it was Sohail that was saying that government gave approval, and the truth of the matter is that even if they didn't give anything else, that approval was crucial, because you are in a nation run by the government. If they say no, there's no how that airport would have been built, no matter the community, the collaboration, or even the funding from the Sialkot business community. It was so key that as soon as the government gave the approval, then even though it was slow, but yet the construction was able to take place. Same thing with Yaba. The main one company was willing to bring in the fiber optic cable to Yaba, but they weren't able to do so if they didn't feel like they had sufficient support. And as soon as government waived this, and in contrast, this can be seen as the approval, it was easy for them to go forward. And we saw the cluster. That was a pivotal moment for the cluster. So I feel like we can really see the similarities and how important it is, even if the private sector is doing a lot. It's very important that the government also shows some form of approval or support.
So what have we got coming up next, Favour?
All right, so I think this has to be my favorite session. This is why we take a look, even if it's not straight, but we take a look at why everything all worked and what are the biggest lessons learned.
I mean, I think generally in Pakistan there's a mindset, and I think this is where Sialkot is an exception. I mean, I wouldn't say that it applies to every single business in Sialkot, but generally people have this mindset that you first talk about a government subsidy or a government support, and then you think of starting something. Because generally there's a lot of criticism of businesses in Pakistan that they are sustained, they are usually not competitive in the international market, especially when you are exporting, you have to be competitive in the international market. But they only become competitive because of government support. I think in Sialkot's case, it was not so. People started with a very small scale manufacturing or production setups, and then they built on it mainly through their own efforts and through the expat community, Pakistan. They were able to network and create value. So I think this kind of mindset was there. Now, when you sit with government, you discuss a challenge, but you also discuss a solution as well. So I mentioned this to Richard in our earlier conversation as well. So I met this gentleman who is in charge of the leading soccer ball exporter from Sialkot. He told me this very interesting story, and I'm putting these stories to give you a context at how people in Sialkot think. During COVID, when the air traffic was disrupted because there were travel bans, there were travel restrictions, there were lockdowns. So Pakistan also suffered because of these lockdowns. The global air traffic to Islamabad, Lahore, Karachi was suspended, Sialkot including. Sialkot's airport started operations. It was the first airport which started international operations, if I'm not mistaken. And the reason was that the Sialkot Chamber spoke with airlines, Middle Eastern airlines, that what would it take you to come to Pakistan during this time? And their demand was very clear that we have strict COVID protocols, we need testing facilities at the airport where passengers can be tested. Okay, you know the solution. Now to address the solution, they got together, identified a space at the airport, spoke with the private labs. Within 2 nights, the establishment was there. The company came and set up the facility to test. And the very next night, a Middle Eastern carrier with full load landed in Islamabad. I think they talk to government, but they talk to the government with the mindset that we are willing to do this much. How are you going to help us? Where are you going to give us policy relief? Where are you going to give us regulatory relief? How are you going to pitch in financially in our effort? Because we know that we can't expect you to do the whole thing. I think this is at the heart of all these interventions. Even if you look at the airport example, it started, the seed money came from the industrialist, and government gave the regulatory approvals, the uh, uh, the clearances that needed from the aviation, from the defense, etc., ministries, and also pitched in with some money. But the main money came from the business houses. So they start with putting something on the table, and then they ask the government. So I think that's what creates this successful public partnership kind of like thing. Generally in Pakistan, when we think of PPPs, and Richard would vouch me on this, that it's all government support to private sector. It's not private sector bringing in something and maximizing outputs. It's the expectation of the private sector that government should give guarantees, government should provide the finances as well, and we should only run the operations or build and run the operations. So I think this is where the thinking is very different in South. And till very recently, I was also very confused by it, because there are no fairy tale ends in life. You always are skeptical about things, that what's going on. But I've started meeting the chamber more frequently in recent years. I've visited quite a few times in my special capacity. And I must confess, I'm amazed by the resolve and dynamism and the wisdom that exists in that business community. It's not that they're all into money making and that's it. They are into money making, of course. They take their businesses very seriously. But I think they have a common sense that they are small. They don't have the government support compared to as some of the bigger businesses have had over the years in Pakistan. And their comparative advantage is to export. Because they are small and they are competitive, they need to export. And they don't shy from turning or looking into any nook and corner to find solutions. And I think when you have that kind of approach, and you not just the approach, you have the willingness to cooperate with each other as well. Because you look, there's surgical, there's soccer, there's leather, there are textile, export, sports, textile. There's very little cohesion between these businesses as value chains. So it's not that your problems are similar to my problems in terms of like manufacturing processes and those things. But you and I face the same challenge because you and I are located in the same geography, and we have to go through the same process in terms of like getting market access. So I think that is something which makes things work. And again, I would come back to management practices, and management practices are humans. I think it's what is in the DNA which forces everything. I mean, generally, I think, Richard, there's this pessimistic view about life that prevails around you, that you can't do it. You can't do it. You were born in a small city. You were born in a smaller family. You don't have the access and needs. I think in life, generally, if you have this view that you can challenge things and you need to bring some value. And of course, that requires a lot of hard work. You can't like cheat your way or buy your way through these things. You have to put a lot of hard work, and you need to put your, your efforts behind your words. So I think while the enthusiasm was there, while the um, management was there, while the thriftiness was there, dynamism was there, but it was all backed by a lot of hard work, pure sweat and grind. And I've met people who are now doing very well in life, but they all tell that the kind of like hardships that they faced when they were trying to open up markets in Europe and UK for their products, they were literally going door to door with their merchandise in their hands or on their shoulders to sell, because they didn't have the means to buy marketing agents or something like that. So I think it's the ability to get yourself dirty in the mud as well. I mean, It's not something that you can sit in a chair in a cozy office and you can do, or you can manage businesses like that. These are family-run businesses. These require a lot of focus and attention. So of course you can understand the amount of sacrifice and amount of passion that goes into this kind of like work development. But of course it's very much backed by the enthusiasm, dynamism, and of course some luck as well. Because if you don't have luck, you're not able to make it. But the luck is created. I would say mostly it's created.
Actually, you see, it was, I will say that you see the sense of deprivation, which was like from obviously the peoples from here who are the trade bodies and political, they were talking to the government, but over and over period, they were not getting the attention from them. That, as I told you, that Sialkot is considered as a dead end, and like in Lahore, most of the time, okay, it is like capital of Punjab, and the people for the education purpose they are coming there. So there was no activity in Sialkot. It was least priority for the government. So due to that reason, that sense of deprivation pulled the people together and made them to get the things done by themselves. That was the main reason also for the people who started working for this, that they were seeing their roads in shabby condition. They were seeing that uh, the main roads, whenever the buyers were coming also, it was like also the two advantage that whenever the buyers were saying that, oh, it is very filthy city. There are no even drainages, no sewerage. So due to that reason, they made up of our mind that it was from the platform of business, and so gradually everything was aligned according to that. I think it is just the people of Sialkot. They are more like they are more democratic, and they may have got some IQ level as was like of Greek people, discuss with each other and to consider other people's opinion also. Uh, that is the only thing. Otherwise, you see, uh, gradually, you see what I think is this, that whatever they did and whatever was, it was some people who, as I'm mentioning, couple of people they thought about that. Okay, if the government is not doing it, someone has to do it. So why shouldn't we do it? And that the rest of the people followed them. The rest of the people followed them, that okay, this is good for them, because as the real estate in Sialkot, Jaffer is at least 40% expensive than Gujranwala. So Gujranwala has more population. It is at par with like maybe Islamabad, or maybe slightly lesser than that. That happened only due to the infrastructure development. And now the motorway has also. Now we are very much connected to Lahore. We are now, from our factory, we can go to airport like by 50 minutes, in 45 minutes also if someone is there. Yes. So the airport is practically it is not feasible, because from 50 minutes it can happen only in Germany, that Cologne and and Düsseldorf has like in 50 minutes they have the airport. It is not feasible, but only by the community, and to cater like this, the strip from here to Islamabad, those people from Jhelum, belonging to Jhelum or Gujarat, and this they are now also traveling. For them, it is also more convenient.
We all learn from each other and we try to replicate these things. But what are the success factors? Why Sialkot city has been so successful in achieving that? We need to look at those factors and then try to replicate those factors in different parts of the country. So if I dissect this project, so I think there are three main drivers. One, I mentioned, that is education level in that city. So this city has almost 100% literacy rate. So they are very, very high skilled people and they are very much innovative. So if we want to replicate that model, so we need to focus on education, especially technical education. And second thing is the community spirit. That is very unique to that city. So a Sialkot Chamber of Commerce has 16,000 members, and there are so many small associations, and their board of directors has 345 directors. I never heard that the organization has 345 directors, and everybody listens to each other. And they have unanimous decision-making bodies, so they mainly tend to agree what the main leadership says. So this trust in the leadership and the community spirit is the main thing which is important to drive these kind of projects. And third is the spirit of inclusiveness. So they want to include these small farms, the neighboring areas, farmers into that. So this again feeds into this inclusiveness. So if this model has to be replicated, it can be replicated, so we can have these kind of drivers in other parts of the world. So Sakhar is trying to do that. So they are exporting dates from Sakhar, because dates is a very specialized product which can be collected and processed and sent to Middle East and other parts of the world. Other cities are also trying to do that, but we need to raise more awareness that these kind of models are successful. So government only doesn't have monopoly on these kind of issues and big projects. Private sector can lead them. So we need more awareness campaign, more information, maybe more R&D to disseminate these kind of information. This is the main driver, is the community spirit. So people trust each other, they listen to each other, and once they have the decision, they stick to that. I think the good starting point could be to learn from the Sialkot model, and learning occurs through visits. So get in touch with the Sialkot Chamber of Commerce and Industry, see how they gone through this process, how they develop consensus, to learn from that model, visit, and they are very open and welcoming. So Sialkot Chamber of Commerce, they got their own Sialkot Material Testing Institute, other where they can deliver this kind of training, how they have achieved that kind of success. And second, I think a most other important thing is a kind of role of political leadership. Because Sialkot has been fortunate that they produce because they are very educated people. So many federal ministers, and especially the people who run the Ministry of Planning, Ministry of Education, they were from this city. They have kind of inclination to promote education and a kind of spirit in that city. So that is another model. So ultimately, all roads lead to the education. So if you are educating people, you are giving them good technical education, then they become more innovative. Especially nowadays, I think replication is becoming much, and learning is becoming much easier because of access to technologies. You don't have to even go. You can have webinar with them. You can do training session while remotely away. So these kind of technologies enable learning. And Harvard Business School or World Bank look at the things mainly from the academic perspective, but for other countries like Nigeria and many countries, Uganda, Kenya, for countries which are at a similar level of economic development, similar social structure, similar political structure, I think it's more relevant for these countries. So what we call it peer-to-peer learning. So these kind of countries which are in the very low at the development ladder, they are very quick to develop that kind of community spirit. So they are small cities, they are tribal cultures. So these kind of institutions help to promote that community culture. So I think these countries can benefit the most from the Sialkot if they get engaged with the Sialkot Chamber of Commerce and Industry and learn from their expertise and try to bring that into their communities.
Okay, we're trying to understand why it works and the lessons that we can learn from this. It's good from the flywheel economics perspective to take a step back and look at the ecosystem, whether it's the role of government, the role of the private sector, the role of skilled workers, educated workforce, all the different elements that might potentially make up a conducive ecosystem. Jaffer, we mentioned earlier, we spoke about government and we sort of we almost downplayed the role of government in this, right? Theirs was to give the approval and then to not do much beyond that. What's your lesson in terms of government in all of this?
Well, the immediate one is the less there is of it, the better. But that might conflict with some of the other values I have. I think coming down to this example, there's something Adnan said that I really like, which is the government's regular approach to PPPs. If anything, PPPs are more in fashion these days in Pakistan than they were at the time of this airport. But I think there's a lesson for government in how they approach it. PPPs usually are government coming up with an offer, whether that's, like Adnan said, a guarantee or a piece of land or some significant concession and investment, and then trying to find partners from the private sector who are willing to benefit from it. In a country like Pakistan, with even where intentions might be 100%, I think there's a capability problem on the government to sort of run such large projects. The concession model is fundamentally flawed. For a cash-strapped economy like Pakistan, even more so. I think there's a lesson for government here that they can be successful, and they don't need to be the driver. Uh, there's a much leaner and more efficient. You come to us with your project, and we'll facilitate you rather than be the main partner or give you XYZ incentives. I think it's different on which projects that's applicable to. Obviously, that there needs to be an inherent advantage uh, to the stakeholders. So, for in this case, the people who came up with the airport were the people who would benefit from the airport. Whereas if it was a top-down planning run from the government, I think there is much less thought given to who the stakeholders are, who benefits, and who should be driving this. So I think that's the first lesson for me for government.
Yeah, and I think that's very aligned to the principles within flywheel economics, because your starting point is to look at what is growing naturally, what's organically growing in your economy, and trying to nurture and support that, as opposed to the more top-down types of approach. The other thing, Jaffer, that strikes me in all of this is a reflection I've had from working over, the past sort of, well, I guess the last 18 years in countries with pretty challenging business environments. And I think when you operate in a poor business environment, there's that classic view of the private sector where you think your competition is the other business that's doing something similar to you in that environment. But when you're in such a harsh business environment, I think the reality is the competition is not that other business that's producing the similar thing to you. It's the business environment that is actually your competition here. And that's why I think when you get a private sector that realizes that and starts doing more of the collaboration, you start getting more success collectively. What's your reflections on the private sector in this ecosystem and how they were able to collaborate and the vision and all that?
So as much as the rational being inside me wants to disagree with the DNA argument, I think there's a little bit of that here. But I'd like to bring it back to exports. So I think one of the reasons why the Sialkot businesses are not shooting each other in the feet or dragging each other down, and rather cooperating to get ahead, is the difference in who their market is. Everyone serving the domestic economy knows that their competition is the other firm serving the domestic economy. Whereas in this case, where it's a bunch of SMEs exporting, and exporting also not to such a high quantum that is sort of Dutch disease inducing, I think they have the vision to realize that they're partners with the other firms while competing for global markets rather than competition. And I think they get a sense of a higher value in the perception of, say, sports or leather exports from Sialkot that other firms have a part to play in, rather than just their firm. So Industry X wants to see Industry Y and Sialkot succeed because it gives Sialkot that sort of brand value that it needs to be a successful competitor in the export market. So I think that understanding your markets and understanding what's required, and then having both the foresight to address it, but also let's just say the altruistic spirit to cooperate to achieve it is great. And as much as we'd like to indoctrinate that in the rest of the private sector, I'm not I'm not sure how much of it comes naturally and how much of it comes as a result of actually being exposed to international markets and competition that they bring with them.
Yeah, I don't think that Adnan and Sohail quite realize how unique the spirit is that is within that Sialkot business community. You know, if we could bottle that spirit and sell it to other business communities in other parts of the world where, you know, the cities that feel like they're economic backwaters of their country, that they're neglected, that they have challenges that aren't being addressed, if you could bottle the spirit that they have in Sialkot and sell it, you know, we would see economic transformation all over the place, right? But the reality is, it still feels pretty unique. Yeah, so other honourable mentions, I guess, in the Sialkot story, I think probably have to go to the fact that, you know, I don't know if it was Adnan, I think, or one of the our other interviewers was mentioning about the fact that this was high value added products that were being sold, and that perhaps that enabled a degree of profits that were in this system, which were probably a bit higher than normal, giving a bit more cash that could be invested and made available into things like these community projects. I think also there's an honourable mention to the education, whether it's technical education or just general education levels within Sialkot, and how that would have helped. I'm not sure either one of those is by itself enough to explain the success story in Sialkot, though. Is it, Jaffer? What, or is it? Am I wrong on that?
No, not either one, but I think both together, right? So it's if you bottle up that spirit, I think you have to provide it to people who have the ability to, and I mean no offense by this, right? Ability is sometimes it's not inherent. But when I say ability, I also mean capital, which means you had enough money to set up a business, your business succeeded enough to have spare capital lying around. So I think those are quite key factors. But yeah, I think education on its own, money on its own. Also, there's probably a bunch of other factors, the SME, the export industry, et cetera, et cetera. But I think all of those put together make this a very good bet.
Yeah, I think the lesson we took from the Yaba Tech Cluster episode in Nigeria was that they didn't need a perfect economic ecosystem in order to get these flywheel effects, these sort of positive effects that were happening and causing a sort of amplification in the growth and prosperity. They needed a good enough ecosystem, and I think certainly there seems to have been a good enough ecosystem within Sialkot business community, because anytime there seemed to be a deficiency in that ecosystem, the Sialkot Chamber of Commerce seemed to come together and tackle whatever was the issue that was challenging them. And that mindset that's there seems to have been very powerful in the stewardship around that economic ecosystem in Sialkot. So I think there's lots of really wonderful lessons to learn from this, not just for government, but also for business communities around the world. I can already see relevance for this when we favor looking at things like the fledgling animation industry in Nigeria. You know, the types of lessons that can come out of this, of how communities of businesses can work together and collaborate and put in the infrastructure that perhaps you could be waiting forever if you're waiting for government to come up with this. And I'm sure the lessons are much wider than that as well. Any final reflections from you, Jaffer, before we wrap up?
Not really, except for I think this is a great example of businesses and what it requires to be a successful business. And I think cooperation comes as part of that. I think I'll keep tabs on Sialkot to see what they do next, because I'm not sure what it is, but whatever it is will be quite exciting and if I may say so, groundbreaking for Pakistan. And I wish that the lesson sort of permeates in other parts of the economy. But thank you.
Yes, I think Sialkot Chamber of Commerce, we hail you. It's a wonderful example and lots to learn from it. So thank you, Jaffer, for joining us today. And thank you also to our guests, Adnan, Sohail, and Salamat. And Favor, over to you for final bits.
Thank you so much, Richard. Thank you so much once again to our guests, and thank you so much, our listeners, for coming on this journey with us. I'm sure you learned a little or a lot. Now, don't forget, you can continue this conversation with us by visiting us on any of our social media platforms, and you might as well also join us on our website at flywheeleconomics.com. We take deeper dives into stories just like this. Until next time, this has been the Flywheel Economics Podcast.